Do you guys remember a little game published by Crafton? Does that ring a bell? It was marketed as like the latest game from one of the, I think it was the executive producer of Dead Space. I've been using the collector's statue to hold up my second play button. Humble brag. But it's this. It's this. You remember this game? The Callisto Protocol. Yes. Quiet. Callisto Protocol was a weird one because it got super hyped up. People were very excited for it. And then we played it and it just had some issues. I'll tell you what, had some issues. Wasn't received super great. I don't actually know where it landed in terms of Metacritic or anything, but it wasn't tremendous, you know. It was, if I had to surmise everything, basically it was a game that was pretty short. Technically, it was kind of buggy, had frame drops galore, all sorts of stuff like that. It didn't feel that novel or interesting. It felt very much like an amalgamation of a bunch of other stuff that it didn't really do anything particularly well, you know? Didn't have any gimmick or gameplay mechanic that it was really good at. It was just like a pretty coagulation of a bunch of other stuff. And it just ended on a cliffhanger. It didn't actually have like a nice tight resolution to its story. It just, across the board, it just wasn't exceptional at anything. It was all just fine and very generic. And as a result, it landed in like the high 60s for most people. High 60s, low 70s. What, like if it were to get like really patched and polished, which eventually it did, maybe you could stretch and be like a 7 out of 10, but it just wasn't, again, it wasn't particularly exceptional. If you got it on a deep sale, sure, a fine Halloween game to try, because it's not like downright bad, in my opinion. There's some clunky stuff with it, like the dodging system and stuff. It's not as bad as some people made it out to be, but you know, it's just not particularly good. But again, the Crafton CEO has now come out and said why they think that it struggled. Callisto Protocol struggled because it didn't have a gameplay edge. That's what Changan Kim, or CH, I'll go with CH, Kim, the CEO of the game's publisher, Crafton, said in a recent interview. Speaking with game developer, Kim talked about Callisto Protocol being the first AAA single-player game from the studio and developer striking distance. He said that there was some difficulty within as to deciding whether the direction they were going was the right way. Quote, "This is a single-player narrative game that's visually stunning and a high-quality game to look at," he said. "Despite that, the game's core is the gameplay. Gameplay comes first is what I learned with the Callisto Protocol." Absolutely. I mean, it's just, the graphics were really good. They were top of the line when the game was running well, but it had troubles. One of the other things was that, just as a little background, I remember when I reviewed this, they released the game to us. Didn't run great at all. Tons of stuttering, you know, that Unreal Engine stutter when it doesn't like pre-compile the shaders. It had that out the ass. And so it just wasn't running great. And then they issued a patch during the review period and it fixed the performance. All of a sudden it started running really well. Cool. So I cut out a big chunk of my review critiquing the performance. And then like an hour, or I think it was like 4 or 5 hours before the embargo lifted, they issued another patch that broke it again. It was very weird. It was very, very weird. And so some reviews didn't mention the performance issues at all. Others mentioned the original patch version, or the original version of the game, where it just didn't run well at all, because they were making their reviews over the course of a few days leading into the weekend or whatever it was. And so some of them finished their review a day or two early. Other people like me were working on it until literal minutes before the embargo lifted. So it was just up in the air, but it was very weird. And we found out later that apparently what happened is that somebody within the developers, the Striking Distance Studios, they apparently like forgot to check the box to include the shader compilation, whatever. They forgot to check that box to include that in the build when they exported it and sent it out for the day one patch. And big oopsie, but that's apparently why the launch version of the game was in that state, even though during the review period, a lot of us had tried it and seen it like that. Yeah, so that it was a big oopsie, big blunder, big oopsie poopsie. They just checked the wrong box and that seriously harmed the game's launch, which is you know, again, just kind of hilarious that something on this budgetary scale could be screwed over like that. But they went in and they continued. They said it could be the most high quality game in the world, but if you don't have a gameplay edge, if you can't differentiate your gameplay from your competitors, it doesn't work out. I was able to reaffirm that. He then told game developer that he understands the gameplay has to innovate with games in order for players to have interest. A new experience is what will help a game's success. This allows for new experiences within the game. And even though the Callisto Protocol is a narrative game, a single player game, you need to be able to offer a good gameplay experience. You can't do that without those elements. As far as moving forward, Kim says that the market is tough to guess what could work and what may not. Still, Krafton and the developers it works with will continuously try these new creative ideas. Not everything will succeed, but one of these days we might just hit another PUBG. This is a very bottom-up approach, I would say, and it's not what a lot of other big companies are attempting right now. Blah, blah, blah. The response to the tweet, you know, there's some valid points in here. I'll keep it simple. We expected a next-gen Dead Space with insane gameplay variety. Instead, we got pretty graphics and a 2010 mobile game and almost no enemy variety. Bland and cheap. Yeah. TLDR, Dead Space Remake exists. Yeah. Melee Damage said gameplay felt extremely bland in a way that I just can't seem to put my finger on. Level design was far too restrictive and made the game feel somewhat dated as a result. Yeah, I think that's fair. Melee combat, blah, blah, blah. I mean, no free upgrade to current gen. Yeah. There's just many things that didn't really click with it, even though it had potential. But you remember, those of you who were here, compared to PUBG, I think it's because didn't Krafton publish it? Yeah. So Krafton, they were the guys behind PUBG. That's why he referred to it. He was like, yeah, maybe one day we'll get another one. You know, that's what he was referring to. But anyway, it's an example of why you can't rely purely on graphics or finesse and things like that. You have to be able to do some other stuff in more creative ways. You have to bring something unique to the table, and they just didn't quite have that. And that's why, even though I don't think Callisto Protocol is like the worst game ever, I don't think it's like a disgusting waste of time and money like some of these games we've seen recently. It still just was not acceptable or exceptional, rather. And that's why instead of having a spot on the bookshelf to stand and be showcased, it instead holds up my Luke Stevens Live YouTube play button because I'd rather have the play button displayed clearly than this game that people might not recognize. He took my thing!